Hi everyone, Bandanner here, I hope you're all doing well. So, I guess I had to bite the bullet sooner or later and do one of these, right? And well, today seems like just the right day, with it being Valentine's Day. I thought of a really cool intro sequence video for this, but there's a hell of a lot of editing involved and I thought about it way too late, so I'll save that for another day. And trust me, there'll be another day that it's worth saving that for. And I've been debating what goes into this video for quite a few days now, and my script is epically long, near 3,000 words. Because the truth is, in one sense, I dislike pitting these games against each other. Then again, perhaps there's no love lost between these two in the first place, and the only one who's going to get their heart broken is me. So, to me, these games play very differently, and I think a lot of people would agree. And, you know, in saying that, some of us just enjoy both games, and others will have serious preferences one way or the other, and in some ways I have my own preferences too, which I suspect will even surprise some people here. Now, before we get stuck in, please do keep the comments civil as always, because I know there's a lot of strong feelings one way or the other, but it's Valentine's Day, right? So let's make love and not war, or some such, lest some people get a spanking. So, Broken Arrow and WARNO have taken two rather different approaches to game development. WARNO went the route of early access to help support development and fund it, where Broken Arrow signed up with their publisher Slytherin, who obviously fund production and development of the game. Both these approaches have their positives and negatives internally, I'm sure. But externally, one area Broken Arrow smashes WARNO out the water is public relations, and indeed press relations. That's not to say that at times UGen don't try hard, but there are times they also fail extremely hard. I won't get into specifics. At the end of the day, those who know, and if anyone's seen my other channel this week, you'll also know. Slytherin, obviously, as a publisher, have a lot more experience in this area and an entire team dedicated to both public relations and press relations, and are very good at doing press releases and everything like that. Not to mention STB themselves, Felix in particular, is very good at interacting with the community and doing Q&A sessions, even on their Discord. Obviously, he's very sensible about how he approaches these as well. UGen, however, have no such dedicated person or team, and frankly it shows. And as much as some of their members try very hard, you can't replace a dedicated person with someone doing it part-time who has no experience in the area. And again, it shows because Broken Arrow in that respect is much better organised, pushed harder to the press, and has a bigger audience as a result. While UGen just seems to rely on the goodwill of content creators who do this for free for them. Of course, all that said, it's probably not something that affects the average player who already knows about the existence of both games. So what then does matter? Gameplay? Difficulty curves? Number of units? Customizability? Single player versus multiplayer content? Graphics? Editors? Modding? Anti-cheat? What your buddies play? What the community's like? And in case it doesn't come across in my voice, they all have question marks next to them. And the truth is, probably all of the above things and more, so let's talk through some of this at least. Gameplay and in some ways the difficulty curve kind of go hand in hand. How hard is a game to jump into and play without having to watch extensive tutorials on YouTube is a big factor here, right? You may disagree, but I found Broken Arrow much easier to jump into, build a deck and play compared to WARNO. And obviously I say this with having some previous experience in this type of game. I mean, I come from the WARNO series of games, so UGen-style deck building, etc. is my bread and butter. That said, when it comes to WARNO, I find the entire process more involved, and perhaps that's my approach to the game, but it never crossed my mind to boot up WARNO, slap any old deck together and join a lobby. Whereas in Broken Arrow, that's exactly what I felt I could do. Now, don't get me wrong, both of these games have a significant learning curve, but WARNO feels much steeper, where Broken Arrow felt a lot more like I could hop in, enjoy the game without having to know and understand every aspect of the game and its mechanics. I do wonder if the quick matching that Broken Arrow has helps that here, but I also think it's just an easier setup to jump into in terms of deck building. I worry less about taking the right units, the meta units, etc, etc. Customization of units perhaps encourages people to take things they think are cool or unique to their style, rather than just trying to find the best unit, which is more often the case in WARNO. Okay, there's always a little jiggling around there by some people, but for the most part, most WARNO decks are very similar. That said, there is a massive gap between just playing Broken Arrow as a casual player and those who are playing it very sweaty with all the meta units and with a lot of micro, just as there's a similar gap in WARNO to some extent. Difficulty curves aside, I find the games play very differently. In WARNO, I feel I am dealing with more units, but then at the same time I also feel like I have to play it more micro-intensively. It feels like it requires a lot more focus, even just playing a casual 10 versus 10. And this leans very well into the WARNO 1v1 games, which is the focus of balance. I'm curious if that will even be possible in Broken Arrow, as the game certainly has no intention of being balanced around it. And that's not a bad thing for the record. Both approaches have their benefits. Broken Arrow, as some people say, feels a lot more like World in Conflict, a great game in its own right by the way, if not a bit dated. And this leans more into that easy to pick up and play element I mentioned before. You can just play the game, or I guess if you want you can go the extreme micro-sweaty gameplay, but that certainly won't be the standard in Broken Arrow. I feel like the meta decks will be less of a big deal there for the majority of players. And oddly that rolls me nicely into decks and units. Wasn't even planned for once. Most decks you build in WARNO end up being a variation on a theme because of the limited units. My decks, for example, are never that dissimilar from some of the top 1v1 players. A couple of units might differ due to playstyle, but mostly it's the same makeup. Broken Arrow, however, with its current open beta, feels a lot more flexible in its deck building. People have quite different decks, and the unit customization, which WARNO lacks entirely, really adds to this. I can take the same jet as someone else but have a totally different loadout and capability set. I can build my deck focused on aggressive airdrops or focus on the slow grind with tanks and IFVs, but by taking the exact same two base specializations. Where in WARNO, if I take the 5th Panzer Division, my deck is going to be built around those tanks, and if I take the 82nd Airborne, my deck is going to be based around the forward deployment, and Eugen's cleaning up of the divisions has only reinforced that they can only be played one way. 35th VDV, for example, having all the tanks and armor removed, means it's literally a forward deployment aggression deck only, and there's little to fall back on after that. In fact, because they also nerfed helicopters at the same time, the deck is pretty much useless in 1v1 and even T-Man couldn't make it work. As you can probably tell by this and other videos, I'm really not overly enthused by Eugen's house cleaning or their new tank rework. For the most part, it's just taken away options, and in the case of Leopard tanks, made them the same as every other tank in the game, rather than their special thing being that they could shoot very effectively on the move. They're now just the same as all the other NATO tanks. Now, in fairness to WARNO here, there are obviously a lot of divisions, so you can always find something for your playstyle. But as someone who cares more about gameplay and fun than realism, well, you already know my feelings. So all in all, with 2 nations and 5 specializations for each of those nations, I expect we will see a lot more variety in decks or battle groups, whatever you want to call them, in Broken Arrow than we will in WARNO. And there's no denying that all the customization of those units in Broken Arrow means it feels like your deck, your units, because you build it this way and these weapons and these upgrades are the ones that you chose for your units. It connects you more to the deck, subconsciously of course. But then again, you know, WARNO divisions are designed to be this way, and that's why there are so many of them. A bit like how Regiments does things, but with a little bit more flexibility. Though, if they keep going the way they're going now, they may as well just do the same as Regiments and have predetermined decks. Regiments is a great game, by the way, though purely single player, and I mention this because that brings us on nicely to single player versus multiplayer content. We have had barely a taste of Broken Arrow's single-player content, a very important part of any RTT or RTS game. As much as multiplayer community might hate it, the average spread is about 80% of players are single-player only to 20% multiplayer in these games. The mission we have been able to try so far is fun in Broken Arrow, but we have no concept of how the AI will play in Skirmish, or how the rest of the campaign might be formatted, or how long it will be. And this is perhaps where WARNO finally outshines Broken Arrow. It's already had skirmish and individual operations for quite a while. Then, as of this week, an Army General campaign for people to get their teeth into. And the Bruderkrieg is a massive improvement over their previous campaigns in earlier titles, which gives me hope for the 4 much larger campaigns that are still to come. Army General, for those who don't know, is like a large-scale, open-form, turn-based battle map where you move groups of units around and then have individual tactical battles. Think like Total War, but not quite. And it's certainly given the game a fresh lease of life, as a lot of people were waiting for that to come out and are waiting for the others. Though it will be noted, some people will find this style of campaign quite boring because it can be quite repetitive. So I certainly won't sit here and claim it's for everyone. Obviously, whatever campaign we get from Broken Arrow, it seems like it will be more of a linear style campaign rather than this big broad army general style, closer to what we got in titles like Command and Conquer, for example, which is fine, it's just different. And hopefully it will be more focused and fun as a result. I mean, that's the hope. We don't know yet. Alright, stop the press. Let's discuss the elephant in the room next. Graphics and the related performance. The truth is, this is an area where both games actually have struggled in their own way, but the effect on players and what they see is very different. WARNO, as some of you may know, has Eugen's bespoke Iris engine. That struggles on maps with lots of buildings, especially around CPU usage. As a result, Eugen has struggled internally to make more city-focused maps without bringing players' PCs grinding to a halt. And they have made massive improvements on that over the last year, but the result is still limitations in terms of city-style maps, so we tend not to get wall-to-wall buildings across the entire map. And in that way, they've kind of been sensible about it in that at least they've stopped the players suffering. Now, Broken Arrow, on the other hand, seems able to make very densely packed city areas. However, its use of Unity, the amount of units in such detail that are spread around, cause very variable performance issues. Some people have very few issues like me, but others seem to still struggle to run the game well. However, the team at STB have made significant improvements over the last year, but clearly there's still room for improvement. Graphically, both games are pretty impressive. The attention to detail on units is fantastic. Broken Arrow perhaps takes the gold here because they have some incredibly fine animations on those units, which WARNO lacks, and will make for some great, really great cinematic videos. But in terms of how pretty the individual maps look, I kind of would say WARNO wins out here. For individual special effects, however, it really is a toss-up. Both games have some special effects that surpass the other. I suspect some people will claim differently, one way or the other, but honestly, I think both games do special effects very well, but certainly they both have areas that look better. Alright, let's move on. So what about editors and in turn modding? Well, WARNO recently released its first alpha build of its map editor, and wow, it is impressive. They made out it was going to be total garbage at first, but it performs much better than expected. Sadly, they did not include a way to export the maps yet. This, along with the other features, like making your own missions and possibly your own Army General campaigns, will come later, they've promised. And I hope they stick to that, because they've promised an editor in the past for Steel Division 2, and that never happened. So I really hope they continue to add the features they've mentioned, because the truth is, one of those features totally sets this apart from Broken Arrow. And that is complete modability with eventual use of your own imported models into the game, which would mean the possibility of total conversion mods. But right now it's a pipe dream because it's not there yet. However, you can do basic modding of the existing units, and that's been in for quite some time. Broken Arrow will also launch with an editor, but seemingly now being much more limited to just mission and scenario editing. That said, if it is as extensive as the Operation Flashpoint editor or the Armor Eden editor it's aiming to be styled off, then the possibilities for custom missions are almost endless, which will make for some fantastic solo and co-op content and should be straightforward to produce. And they have talked about custom game modes within that for multiplayer as well, so I have question marks there. I don't know what that will entail. However, Broken Arrow will not support modding or creation of your own maps. So in scope, WARNO obviously wins here, but they have to deliver all those features, which in fairness, they've not done in the past, so all eyes are on them regarding this. Next up is a fairly small topic of anti-cheat. I say small because WARNO has no anti-cheat, but there are definitely cheats available for it, like a map hack, which obviously for a competitive style game aiming for 1v1 balance etc. is not ideal. As it stands, the community hosted tournaments are heavily moderated, so it doesn't really come into play there, at least I hope not for the most part. Broken Arrow have said they aim to have a server-side anti-cheat, though I am unclear what exactly that would entail. Though in its current open beta there are at least a couple of exploits with invisible units, so I really do hope they fix that because it's very frustrating as people seem to be deliberately doing it now. Oh well. All of that said, all of those topics covered, the reality is for some people it will just be one of my friends playing. I'm buying that. I did make a little mention of community, and I think it's important to touch on it very briefly. The reality is any gaming community has their bad apples, that's just a fact of life. I think WARNO, unfortunately, has more purely because UGen have spent many years not dealing with it, where on the other hand, Slytherin, being a bigger publisher, are very good at moderation and dealing with this type of stuff and nipping it in the bud early. I also suspect that Broken Arrow will have a much bigger community of just casual people who don't get involved in all of the nonsense. Well done if you listened to all that and made it this far, everyone. Did you know that's well over 2,000 words? But we're nearly at the end now. It's nearly time to take a breather. The one thing left to sort of discuss is what do I think on a personal level. I think Broken Arrow has some really cool features. I like being able to customize my units. I like that I can shoot down ballistic missiles. It has cool and realistic helicopter movement, and the air combat is much cooler than it is in WARNO. The options for bombing and artillery are also beyond anything WARNO has or probably will get. As a game to boot up and play for fun, I actually much prefer Broken Arrow, even in its current state. That said, I still think it needs work. In particular, fixing of exploits, bugs and performance issues, and a rework of the line of sight system, but I also think WARNO needs a rework of its line of sight system. But Broken Arrow is fun. I don't feel I have to play meta or sweaty. I can just enjoy bringing a variety of units and have a fun game. Its single player is obviously currently a bit of a mystery, but if the editor is what I expect it to be, then it will be awesome and only expand with a lot of community input and content. WARNO, on the other hand, is a much harder game to get into. You have to understand the units much better to be able to even play the game without getting completely trampled. Sometimes it feels like you need to do a master's and then a PhD in the game, and everything about it just feels more sweaty and meta when it comes to multiplayer especially. And its balance is based off 1v1, so you kind of expect that. And the reality is, as much as it makes it sound like that's a bad thing, the competitive nature of WARNO is actually one of its assets. People want to improve, it's exciting to watch the top players play, and I don't think you're going to quite get that with Broken Arrow. The realism aspects of the game for me sometimes ruin some of the fun I can have with it, but I expect there are other groups out there who really find that realism a fun thing. WARNO will also have a much more extensive single-player campaign set with a lot of replayability, not to mention those campaigns can be played solo, co-op, or even versus other players. That said, I also do think that for some players this type of campaign will be kind of boring and repetitive. It's definitely not for everyone. The reality is, I believe there is room for both of these games, and actually rather than fighting between the communities, there's a lot of overlap in players who might enjoy both. I find Broken Arrow more fun than WARNO, but I still enjoy both games. There will of course be people who massively prefer one or the other, and let me tell you, that is also fine. People have different tastes. You don't have to tell them why the game they prefer is shit though. Just let them enjoy it for fuck's sakes. At the end of the day, my advice is this. Give the Broken Arrow open beta a go while it's still available, which has been extended till the 19th of February. If you're stuck, firstly, you can play the single player mission because they added that back. Secondly, on this channel, I've got a couple of basics videos going through the decks, and on my RTS and stuff channel, I've got some more detailed videos going through the American deck and soon the Russian deck as well. WARNO, on the other hand, well, it's still in early access, and you have to pay. So I'm not going to tell you to buy that because I don't tell people to buy early access games. I hope one day they will do a free weekend so people can get a taste of Army General in particular, but UGen's owners are quite old school. And I'll leave it at that. There we go. Broken Arrow versus WARNO. Maybe it doesn't have to be a total heartbreak situation. Maybe there's room for a relationship with both. Maybe there's a love triangle in there somewhere. Happy Valentine's Day. I love you all, regardless of which game you like more.